My sister Brezada used my $1.4 million ranch for her wedding. A week later, as if it were the most natural act in the world, she showed up with a moving truck, ready to move in. Her smile was the same condescending smile she had perfected over her 38 years of life. The smile of the favorite daughter, the drama queen, who always, without exception, gets what she wants. She strolled across my porch, the morning sun lighting up her hair like an ironic halo, pointing with a finger where the new sofa should go, where the coffee table should be placed. But she didn't know that I, Amankai, the invisible sister, the patient shadow who always gave in to keep a family peace that never existed, had changed. She didn't know that the switch inside me had finally been flipped. She had no idea that while she directed the movers as if she were the lady of my house, I had arranged for my lawyer, attorney Hernan Montero, to be waiting patiently for her at the main entrance at the end of the gravel driveway. She didn't know that in the elegant leather briefcase he held with imperturbable calm, not only rested the original deeds, every page a testament to my sweat and sacrifice, proving that every inch of that land legally and morally belonged to me. Also, nestled among the corporate documents, was an eviction order, a cold, official document with her name and that of her brand new husband, printed in clear, crisp, and definitive letters. She thought this would be the day of her greatest victory, the final act in a life of silent usurpations. The day she would finally take the last thing I had left, by a supposed divine right that existed only in her mind and in my mother's. But she was catastrophically mistaken. This would not be her coronation day, it would be the day of my liberation. The day the fortress I had built in silence would finally show its walls. My name is Amankai. At 34, I have learned to navigate two completely different worlds. In one, that of air-conditioned boardrooms and transcontinental video conferences, I am the founder and CEO of Tequila, the Fortress. People who know me in that universe describe me as determined, strategic, sometimes even a bit relentless. I've sat across from German distributors who tried to intimidate me and walked out with exclusivity contracts. I've nosed an extra añejo barrel, detected a discordant note imperceptible to others, and halted a $100,000 production run. My life is a sequence of high-stakes decisions. But in my other world, the one that begins when I walk through the door of my mother's house, I am still Amankai, the younger daughter, the quiet one, the one engrossed in her little business, the one who somehow never quite grew up in their eyes. My true sanctuary, the place that represents the antithesis of my corporate life, is the El Milagro Ranch. An hour from the madness of Guadalajara, on the outskirts of the magical town of Tequila, the ranch is the soul of my story. It's not one of those modern, ostentatious haciendas. It's an old main house with thick adobe walls that breathe coolness in the afternoon heat and hold the echo of generations. The air smells of damp earth, of jasmine if the wind blows in the right direction, and of the sweet aroma of cooked agave from the nearby distilleries. This place belonged to my grandfather, a man of the countryside with hands as calloused as the bark of a mesquite tree and a wisdom that didn't come from books. He was the only person in my childhood who, when he looked at me, didn't see my sister's shadow. He saw the little girl who preferred learning to distinguish types of agave over playing with dolls. He saw potential, he saw a silent strength. In my family, the dynamic was always painfully clear, an unwritten script that we all followed to the letter. My older sister, Brezada, 38, was born to be the center of the universe. She is one of those women whose presence fills a room, with dark, wavy hair, a scandalous laugh, and a superficial charm that could disarm even the most jaded person. She was the jewel in the crown of my mother, Silvana. My mother adored her with a blind devotion, one that made her forgive every whim, justify every failure, and celebrate every mediocre achievement as if it were a monumental feat. The clothing boutique Brezada opened with my mother's money and closed in 6 months was a valuable learning experience. The 3 university degrees she left halfway through were a sign of her creative and free spirit. Brezada was the bright, loud, demanding sun, and I was the pale, silent moon, who only existed to reflect her light and maintain the balance of the family's solar system. My success, the true scope of the fortress, is a secret I have guarded with the zeal of a pirate's treasure, not out of modesty, but as a strategy of self-preservation forged over years of experience. I knew with absolute certainty that if they knew the true magnitude of my fortune, if they knew that my little business exported to over 20 countries and that my bottles were sold in exclusive bars in New York and Tokyo, they wouldn't see Amon Kai the entrepreneur. They would see an ATM with no credit limit, an inexhaustible resource to finance Brezeda's broken dreams and to appease my mother's perpetual anxiety about what people would say. So I allowed them to live in their comfortable ignorance. I let them believe my company was a profitable hobby that allowed me to live well in the city. They never wondered how I paid the mortgage on my luxury apartment. They never questioned my travels. They never connected the dots. It was easier for them to keep me in the box of the responsible younger sister. To them, I was still the same invisible girl. And that invisibility, as ironic as it sounds, was the shield that allowed me to build my empire, brick by brick, in peace. The El Milagro Ranch was the only tangible part of my success that I had decided, in a moment of emotional weakness, to share with them. And I was about to discover, in the most brutal way possible, that for my family, sharing was never enough. Wanting it all was their natural state. To understand why a simple moving truck at the entrance of my ranch could detonate such a thermonuclear reaction within me, a guided tour through the halls of my memory is necessary. I call it my museum of pain. It's not a place I go for self-pity. It's a forensic archive, a catalog of evidence that, piled one on top of the other like geological strata, built the woman I am today. Each memory is a carefully preserved exhibit that explains the fortress, but also the wound. The first piece in the collection, the most visited during my sleepless nights, is illuminated by the flickering lights of a party. My 15th birthday. Or to be precise, the absence of one. The real celebration had been Brezeda's 15th birthday, 4 years earlier. That wasn't a party, it was a social event that was still talked about at family dinners. My mother, Silvana, had transformed into a full-time event planner for a year. The result was straight out of a telenovela, a rented garden that looked like paradise, a designer dress brought from the United States, a main escort who was the captain of the football team, and 200 guests. Every detail, from the centerpieces to the live band, was a monument to the status of her favorite daughter. I remember my mother, radiant and exhausted, saying, "My princess deserves the best." When my turn came, the family budget had conveniently been adjusted. The crisis, the debts. The celebration was reduced to a family meal at home. My main gift, presented with a smile that didn't understand excuses, was a dress from Brezeda's party, one she no longer wore. "It looks beautiful on you, my daughter," my mother said, adjusting the shoulders of a garment that smelled of someone else's perfume and memories that weren't mine. "It's practically new. No one will notice." That night, as my aunts, uncles, and cousins laughed and ate cake, I felt like a ghost, an understudy wearing the star's costume. I smiled, I thanked them for the modest gifts, but inside, something hardened. The following week, under the pretext of saving for college, I started working at a small grocery store on weekends. The smell of disinfectant and wet cardboard became my perfume. With my first paycheck, I didn't buy the clothes or makeup my friends craved. I went to a bookstore and bought 3 used books on business administration. It was my first act of silent rebellion, my first investment in my escape plan. The second room of the museum smells of library chlorine and reheated late-night coffee. University. Brezeda, whose grades always floated in mediocrity, decided her calling was fashion design. My mother, without a second's hesitation, sold a small plot of land that my grandparents had left her, a piece of land that was supposed to be for both of us. The money funded tuition at the most expensive private university in the city, an apartment so the girl wouldn't be distracted by public transport, and endless art supplies. Brezeda lasted 3 semesters. Her university legacy was a portfolio of half-finished sketches and a wardrobe worth more than a car. When I graduated from high school with an impeccable GPA and the dream of studying business administration, my mother's response was a tired sigh and a pat on the back. "Amon Kai, there's no money left. You're smarter than your sister. I'm sure you'll find a way. And I found a way. The way meant sleepless nights studying for the entrance exam to a high-performance public university. The way meant getting an academic excellence scholarship that covered tuition but not living expenses. The way meant working 40 hours a week as a waitress, serving hot plates to people who complained about trivialities while I didn't know if I'd have enough for the bus ride home. While Brezeda posted pictures on social media of her lunches at trendy cafes with the caption, "Life is hard," I sometimes counted coins for a coffee, and my only dinner was the bowl of soup the restaurant cook gave me at the end of my shift. My mother never asked if I needed anything. Never. She took it for granted that my strength was an inexhaustible resource, like water from a well that never runs dry. And that brings us to the main hall of the museum, the largest, most secret, and most painful. It doesn't exhibit an injustice, but an act of love that was interpreted as a simple business transaction. 2 years ago, a call from my uncle Hiladio chilled my blood. "My dear, your mother and sister are going to sell El Milagro," he told me, his voice heavy with deep sadness. A series of Brezeda's failed businesses, a jewelry line that never took off, a cryptocurrency investment recommended by a boyfriend and blindly supported by my mother had left them on the brink of bankruptcy. A local construction company, known for its predatory practices, had made them a ridiculously low offer, and they, with their backs against the wall, were about to accept. The thought of the ranch, the only place on earth where I felt seen and valued by my grandfather, becoming a subdivision of identical houses with cutesy names, physically shattered me. I couldn't allow it. But I knew that offering them the money directly would be a monumental mistake. It would be a temporary patch, and I would officially become the savior, a position that would only increase their expectations and demands to infinity. So I did what I do best. I moved my pieces in silence from the shadows. I met with Attorney Montero in his office. I explained the situation. His face, normally impassive, showed a hint of compassion. Together, we designed a strategy. Using one of my company's investment firms, an entity with a neutral name and no apparent connection to me, we submitted a counteroffer. It was 20% higher than the developers, a fair price that would allow them to pay off every last penny of their debts and live comfortably for years. To them, it was a miracle from heaven. A mysterious investor from the city who had fallen in love with the place. They cried with relief on the phone. "We're saved, Amon Kai," my mother exclaimed, her voice vibrating with joy. "An angel bought the ranch from us. A true angel." I, on the other end of the line, in my office overlooking the entire city, with the signed purchase agreement on my desk, felt a mixture of relief and a solitude so profound it almost drowned me. I had saved them, but to do so, I had to remain invisible. I bought the ranch not as a trophy of my success, but as a desperate act to protect a memory. And now, 2 years later, my sister, believing the owner was a wealthy stranger, was coming not just to borrow it, but to take it by force. She wasn't trying to steal a house, she was trying to steal the last piece of my history, the only one I had fought so hard to preserve. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon, just as I was in the middle of a tense negotiation with a bottle supplier. I saw Brezeda's name flash on my cell phone screen and felt that familiar pang of anticipation and exhaustion. I excused myself, stepped out onto my office terrace, and answered with a professional tone I rarely used with her, a defense mechanism. "Amon Kai, little sister." Her voice was a thick, cloyingly sweet syrup, the tone she always used when she was about to ask for something big. "How's the hardest working businesswoman in all of Jalisco?" I ignored the empty flattery. It was the usual overture. "What is it, Brezeda?" "I'm in the middle of something important." "Oh, always so busy, so serious," she chirped, as if my work were an annoying whim. "Well, I'm calling with wonderful news, something that will make your day. Damian and I are getting married." Damian was her boyfriend of the past year, a man with a toothpaste commercial smile and an air of superiority I never liked. But my role was that of the supportive sister, so I feigned the enthusiasm expected of me. "Wow, Brezeda, congratulations. That's great news. Thank you, thank you. We're incredibly happy, she said. And then came the real purpose of the call. And that's why I was calling, sis. We've been looking at wedding venues, and everything is so expensive, so cold, so impersonal. And last night, Damian, who is a genius, had the most brilliant idea. He said to me, "My love, what if we get married at the family ranch? It would be so meaningful, so magical." The silence I let hang on the line was dense, heavy. I could hear the Guadalajara traffic in the distance, a world that felt a million miles away from my sister's audacity. "Brezeda," I said slowly, choosing each word, "El Milagro isn't the family ranch. It's my house. I bought it." I could feel her smile falter on the other end of the phone, like a flickering light. "Well, yes, technically you signed the papers," she conceded, as if it were a minor detail, "but you know what I mean. It's our place. It has our memories. We grew up running through those fields. It would be like having Grandpa with us on that special day. Imagine it, Amankai, a sunset ceremony with the agave fields in the background." Her voice dropped to a dramatic whisper, an Oscar-worthy performance for an audience of one. "I don't know, Brezeda. It's my personal space. I have my things, my routines," I started to say, searching for an excuse that would sound valid to her. "Oh, please, Amankai, don't be so selfish," she interrupted, the syrup vanishing to reveal the steel beneath. "It's just one weekend. We'll be super careful. Besides, Damian's parents are offering to pay for everything, so it will be a first-class wedding. It would bring prestige to the place." The insult, the implication that my ranch needed them to give it prestige, tightened my jaw. "I'll think about it," I said, a delaying tactic to end the conversation. Not even 10 minutes passed. My phone rang again. It was my mother, Silvana. The emotional assault team was in full swing. "My dear, I just spoke with your sister. She's devastated," she began, her voice already tinged with rehearsed disappointment. "Is it true you're hesitating to lend her the ranch for her wedding?" "Mom, it's my home, not a public event hall," I replied, feeling my carefully constructed defenses begin to crack. "For God's sake, Amankai, listen to yourself sometimes. She's your only sister. She's getting married. What's the harm in sharing a little of what you have, be it a lot or a little? Family is for supporting each other, for being there in the important moments. Your grandfather would be so happy to see his granddaughter getting married on his land. Or has your success already made you forget where you come from and who has supported you?" Every word was a low blow, a guided missile aimed at my weakest points, designed to activate my guilt complex. Then, like a coordinated attack, my Aunt Carmen called. My cousin Veronica sent me a text message. All with the same script, a pressure campaign orchestrated to perfection by the General-in-Chief, my mother. I felt cornered, as always. The little girl who just wanted some peace, some approval, resurfaced from the depths. That night, exhausted from fighting, I called Brezeda. My voice sounded hollow, defeated. "Fine," I said. "You can use the ranch." I heard a shriek of joy on the other end. But with very clear conditions. Only the wedding weekend, from Friday to Sunday. You hire a professional cleaning crew afterward. And anything, no matter how small, that gets broken or damaged, you pay for it. Understood? "Of course, little sister." "Understood," she exclaimed, her voice dripping with a gratitude I knew was as ephemeral as a soap bubble. "I knew you'd understand. You're the best sister in the world." I hung up the phone and stared into the darkness of my Guadalajara apartment. The best sister in the world. The phrase didn't feel like a compliment, it felt like the bars of a cell. I had just handed over the keys to my sanctuary, and a cold, clear voice in the back of my mind whispered that I had made a terrible, terrible mistake. 2 weeks before the wedding, Brezeda and Damian arrived at the ranch for a planning visit. They didn't come alone. They were accompanied by a wedding coordinator, a thin woman with a tablet and an expression of perpetual impatience, and Damian's parents, a couple who exuded wealth and an air of critical evaluation. From the moment they stepped out of their luxury SUV, I felt a palpable shift in the air. They were no longer guests asking for a favor. They acted like the lords of the manor, surveying their domain. "The flower arch will go here," Brezada declared immediately, pointing to the old mesquite tree under which my grandfather used to sit and read in the afternoons. She didn't ask, she decreed. "And this area," she said, sweeping her hand over the small, fragrant herb garden I personally cultivated for my kitchen, "will clear it for the dance floor. We need space." Damian, meanwhile, walked the property with his hands on his hips, like a conqueror assessing his new territory. "This land has incredible potential," I heard him say loudly to his father. "With a small investment, we could build a few luxury guest cabins. An exclusive retreat. The market for luxury tourism in Jalisco is booming." My stomach clenched. I approached the group, trying to maintain a casual smile. "It's a place for rest, Damian, not for business." "Just an idea, sis-in-law," he said when he noticed my gaze, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "One can't help but think about business, right, Amankai? It's what we visionaries do." The condescending compliment tasted like poison. The invasion continued inside the house. Brezada wrinkled her nose at the rustic solid wood furniture I had chosen so carefully, pieces that honored the history and essence of the place. "This looks so dated," she commented loudly to her coordinator, loud enough for me to hear. "We'll have to bring in some lounge sofas for the reception. Something more chic." "Don't worry, Amankai. We'll leave them in the storage room afterward in case you want to use them." The breaking point for me, the moment that should have been my unequivocal signal to cancel everything, was a direct confrontation. I walked into the main living room and found it empty of one of its most precious treasures. An old oil painting of an agave landscape, painted by a local artist who was a friend of my grandfather's, was no longer hanging over the fireplace. My heart skipped a beat. I found it in the storage room, carelessly propped against a damp wall. I walked out of there with the painting in my hands and looked for Brezada. I found her laughing with Damian's mother on the porch. "What is this doing in the storage room?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. She looked at me with annoyance. "Oh, Amankai, so dramatic. It just didn't match the color palette we chose for the decorations. It's too dark, depressing. Don't worry, we'll put it back up later." "No," I said, my voice firmer. "We won't put it back up. I will put it up now. And it's not moving from here." Brezada's smile froze. Damian's mother watched us with morbid interest. Well, as you wish," my sister said, rolling her eyes. "But just so you know, it will ruin the photos." And she turned her back, leaving me there, hugging the painting as if it were a shield. That night, as I drove back to Guadalajara, the unease had turned into a cold, heavy anxiety. I kept telling myself I was overreacting, that it was the stress of the wedding, that Brezada had always been inconsiderate. I told myself to be patient, that it was only one weekend. I tried to convince myself that the love for my family, or the illusion of what was left of it, was worth the temporary sacrifice of my peace. But the image of my grandfather's painting, abandoned in the darkness of the storage room, and the ease with which my sister had discarded it, wouldn't leave me alone. It was an omen, a silent warning that they weren't just rearranging furniture, they were trying to erase my presence, my history, to write their own over it. The wedding day was a spectacle of opulence that seemed designed to humiliate the simplicity of my ranch. I counted at least 200 guests, a tide of people I had never seen in my life, men in expensive suits and shiny watches talking about stocks and politics, women in designer dresses and jewels that flashed cruelly under the Jalisco sun. They were, without a doubt, the partners, clients, and friends of Damian's wealthy family. My own family, my uncles, my cousins, looked like a small group of nervous extras lost in a Hollywood production they didn't understand. They transformed El Milagro until it was unrecognizable. My rustic porch, where I used to have coffee in the mornings, was now draped with delicate white silk curtains. My cozy living room had become an impersonal mixology bar. And in the garden, where before only the chirping of birds and the wind through the agaves could be heard, a jazz band now played soft melodies that all sounded the same. I felt like a tourist in my own home, smiling and nodding, while inside, a sense of alienation grew so deep that I felt physically detached from my surroundings. At one point, while looking for a glass of water, one of the guests, an older man with a sour face, stopped me. "Excuse me, miss," he said in an authoritative voice. "Could you bring me another whiskey on the rocks?" He looked at me as if I were part of the staff. For a second, I was about to tell him who I was, but instead, I just smiled and said, "Right away, sir." I went to the bar, asked the bartender for the drink, and brought it to him. He didn't even thank me. In that moment, I understood my place at this event. I was invisible, and for them, my invisibility was my function. Brezeda, clad in a lace and pearl dress that surely cost more than my first car, floated among the guests, accepting congratulations, the undisputed queen of a kingdom that did not belong to her. Her laugh echoed throughout the place, a sound that to me was no longer joyful, but metallic and hollow. The moment that changed everything, the instant that fractured my reality, came during the reception. Night had fallen, and the ranch was magically illuminated by hundreds of warm lights. It was a little chilly, so I went up to my second-floor study to get a shawl. The door was slightly ajar, and as I approached, I heard voices inside. It was Damian and his father. Something in their conspiratorial tone made me stop dead, hidden in the dimness of the hallway, holding my breath. "The place is perfect, son. Much better than you described," Damian's father was saying, his voice deep and filled with a predatory satisfaction. "It has direct access to the main highway. The feasibility study will be a mere formality." "I told you, Dad," Damian replied, and his tone contained an arrogance that turned my stomach. "And the best part is, it will practically be free. Brezeda is the emotional owner of this place, and her mother supports her in everything. The little sister, the supposed legal owner, is a soft touch. She's spent her whole life giving in for the family. It's a matter of pushing the right buttons. Guilt, obligation, sisterly love's an open book." My heart began to pound with a painful force against my ribs, a dull drum in the silence of the hallway. Pushing the right buttons. Was I an open book to them? Damian's father let out a dry laugh, a sound without joy. "And are you sure she won't object when you move in next week?" "Not at all," Damian said with a chilling confidence that froze my blood. "We'll present it as a done deal. Brezeda will tell her it's her wedding gift, that since she's never here, it's better for us to take care of it and improve it. The mother will bombard her with emotional blackmail about family unity and how wonderful it will be to have the grandchildren running around here. In a month, Amankai will have given up. You know her, she'll avoid conflict at all costs. And then, Dad, we can start talking to your investors about the luxury agave retreat project. In 6 months, we'll have total control of this land." I clapped a hand over my mouth to stifle a choked sob. I felt the floor open up beneath my feet. Every word was a piece of a monstrous puzzle that fit together perfectly. It wasn't a whim, it wasn't inconsideration, it was a plan, a cold, methodical, and calculated conspiracy to steal my home, my sanctuary, my grandfather's legacy, using my own love and sense of duty as weapons against me. I backed away from the door, moving like an automaton, my legs trembling. I returned to the party, but I no longer saw warm lights, but interrogation lamps. The sound of jazz and laughter now seemed like a grotesque cacophony, the soundtrack to my own execution. I found a dark corner near the agave fields and took a deep breath, the cold air filling my lungs, trying to calm the violent shaking of my hands. The betrayal was so immense, so absolute, that it left no room for tears. Instead, I felt something new being born in the ruins of my broken heart, an icy rage, a clarity of purpose as sharp and dangerous as the tip of an agave leaf. I looked at my sister, laughing in the center of the dance floor, completely oblivious that her world of lies was about to collide with a fortress she never knew existed. The game had changed. I was no longer the victim. I was no longer the invisible sister. From that moment on, I became the strategist. The party went on, but for me, the war had just begun. And I, for the first time in my life, was ready to fight and to win. On Sunday night, when the last of the vendors had left and an unnatural, tension-filled silence fell over El Milagro, I assumed Brezeda and Damian would at least pretend to prepare to leave. But they didn't. "We're absolutely exhausted, little sister," Brezeda said, collapsing dramatically onto one of the white sofas they had brought for the reception. "It was just too much. We'll stay a couple more days to rest and recover before the honeymoon. You don't mind, do you?" What could I say? My mind was already working on the counterattack, and for it to work, I needed them to feel confident, to believe their plan was unfolding without the slightest hitch. I needed them to walk deeper into the trap. "Of course, no problem," I replied, my voice sounding surprisingly calm, almost gentle. "Take your time. Rest." The 2 days turned into 4, then 5. The honeymoon was conveniently postponed due to a supposed problem with the travel agency. During that week, I witnessed a slow, methodical, and brazen invasion. Small items belonging to Damian began to appear and colonize my spaces, his expensive shaving kit on my bathroom's marble countertop, his golf shoes by the front door, a box of Cuban cigars on my study side table. Brezeda, for her part, didn't just settle in, she began to redecorate with the authority of an empress. On Wednesday, while I was on a work call in my study, I heard the unmistakable noise of a delivery truck. Peeking out the window, I saw 2 men unloading a huge, modern gray sectional sofa. I went downstairs just as they were forcing it through my living room door. "What is this?" I asked Brezeda, who was directing the operation with the gestures of an orchestra conductor. "Oh, hi," she said, as if it were the most normal thing in the world, turning to me with a radiant smile. "Yours was horrible, darling, super uncomfortable and a dreadful color. This one is much more elegant, don't you think? It's a wedding gift from Damian's parents." "And what happened to my sofa?" I asked, my voice dangerously low, every syllable controlled. "Oh, that. We donated it to the village church." Father Miguel was very grateful, she replied with a beatific smile, as if expecting me to congratulate her for her act of charity performed with my property. I felt the blood rush to my head, a furious heat. That sofa had been the first major purchase I made when I acquired the ranch. I had spent countless hours on it, reading, working, simply existing. And she had given it away as if it were old junk, a piece of trash. She hadn't just invaded my space, she had erased a part of my history within it. That night, I called my mother. It was my final test, my last chance to give her the benefit of the doubt. "Mom, Brezeda is taking my things out of the ranch and putting hers in." She gave away my sofa without asking me. Silvana's response was as expected, a sigh laden with infinite reproach. "Amon Kai, for God's sake, don't start again. They're newlyweds, they're nesting. It's natural for them to want to make the place their own. Besides, I'm sure that new sofa is much nicer than that old thing you had. You should be grateful they're improving the house. Don't be so possessive and materialistic. Let your sister be happy for once in her life." I hung up. I didn't say goodbye. There was nothing more to say. The last door to doubt, to the possibility of a misunderstanding, had been slammed shut. My mother was not an innocent bystander, she was an active accomplice, the architect of this toxic dynamic. It was clear that the only person who was going to defend my boundaries, my home, and my sanity, was me. The invasion was no longer subtle, it was a declaration of war, and I was ready to respond with my entire arsenal. The conversation with my mother was the final confirmation I needed. Diplomacy had failed. Patience was a weakness I could no longer afford. As I hung up the phone, I felt the last thread of filial obligation, that invisible cord that had kept me tied to their expectations my entire life, snap with a sound audible only to me. I was alone in this, and for the first time in my life, the loneliness didn't feel like a void, but like an open space full of possibilities. I felt light. I felt dangerous. My first call, made with steady hands, was to the only person in my family whose opinion I still valued, my anchor in a sea of madness, my Uncle Hiladio. He was my father's younger brother, a man who, like my grandfather, saw the world in terms of hard work, respect, and honesty. I told him everything, unvarnished, from the conversation I overheard at the wedding to the donated sofa and the call with my mother. He listened in a silence that was heavy and attentive. When I finished, there was only a moment of stillness before his voice, deep and filled with a contained fury that vibrated through the phone, rumbled. "That spoiled brat," he growled, referring to Brezada, "and your mother enabling her as always. They think the world owes them something. It's about time, my dear. It's about time you showed them what you're made of. Don't give an inch. Whatever you need, money, moral support, a couple of guys to throw their stuff out by force, whatever it is, just tell me." His words were like a bomb, a validation I desperately needed. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't overreacting. Someone else saw the injustice with the same blinding clarity I did. "Thank you, Uncle. I just needed to hear that," I said, my voice breaking slightly, not from sadness, but from overwhelming gratitude. My second call was to Attorney Montero. I dialed his private number. He wasn't just my lawyer, he was my mentor, my strategist, a man in his 60s with a mind as sharp as a scalpel and an unwavering loyalty. He answered on the second ring. "Attorney," I said, without preamble, "we have a hostile situation at El Milagro." I laid out the facts concisely and professionally, as if I were presenting a case at a board meeting: the wedding, the conspiracy, the gradual invasion, the plan by Damian and his father. Montero listened without interrupting, making only small sounds of affirmation. When I finished, his response was immediate and precise. "Understood, Amoncai. This is an attempt at dispossession through breach of trust, aggravated by possible fraud. A classic case, unfortunately. I need you to send me any written communication you have with your sister regarding permission for the wedding, mails, messages, whatever. We need to establish that the permission was temporary and conditional." "I have them," I replied. I had saved every cynical text message. "Perfect," Montero said, and I could almost hear a predatory smile in his voice. "I'm going to prepare 3 things. First, a precautionary eviction order requested by the company. Second, certified copies of all documentation proving that Tequila La Fortaleza, S.A. de CV is the sole and legitimate owner of the property. And third, an updated commercial valuation of the ranch and a report on the company's assets. I want them to understand who they're dealing with. They are not messing with your little sister, they are messing with a corporation. And corporations don't have family feelings. When do you think they'll be ready?" I asked, feeling the adrenaline start to course through my veins. "Give me 48 hours. We'll be there first thing Monday morning. In the meantime, you do nothing. Do not confront them. Let them get comfortable. Let them bring in all their furniture. The more they settle in, the harder and more humiliating the fall will be. Act normal. Be the Amoncai they think they know. The one who gives in, the one who avoids conflict." I hung up the phone, and for the first time in days, the knot in my stomach loosened. I had a plan. I had allies. The invisible girl was about to show them all that the fortress she had built wasn't just made of tequila. The following Monday, exactly 1 week after the wedding, the phone rang at 9 a.m. It was my neighbor from the adjoining ranch, an elderly woman named Dona Inés, with whom I occasionally shared coffee and gossip. "Amoncai, my dear, I'm calling because there's some strange activity over here," she said in her slow, curious voice. There's a huge moving truck, one of those long-distance ones, blocking the entrance to your ranch. Men are unloading everything: refrigerators, beds. It looks like someone is moving in for good. Thank you for letting me know, Dona Inés. I'm aware of the situation, I replied with a calm that surprised even me, a calm that came from preparation and certainty. In fact, I'm on my way there right now. The 1-hour drive from my apartment in Guadalajara to El Milagro was the longest and yet the shortest of my life. I felt no nerves, no fear, not even the seething rage of the previous days. I felt a kind of dangerous serenity, the calm before the perfect storm. I turned off the radio. I needed silence. With every kilometer I traveled down the highway, I felt like I was shedding a layer of the old Amenkith one who doubted, who felt guilty, who sought approval. The woman driving that car towards the ranch was the CEO of the fortress. I was going into a negotiation, and I had no intention of losing. When I arrived, the scene was even more surreal and shameless than I had imagined. The truck, with the logo of a national moving company, was parked at the entrance of my dirt road. Several men in sweaty uniforms were unloading boxes, furniture, and appliances. And there on my porch, with a clipboard in hand and a visor to shield herself from the sun, was my sister Brezeda, directing the operation with the authority of a general. Beside her, Damian was giving instructions to a couple of workers on how to handle a double-door refrigerator that clearly wouldn't fit through the main entrance. I parked my car right behind the truck, blocking any possible exit. I got out and walked towards them. The sound of my leather boots on the gravel was the only noise that broke the murmur of the workers and my sister's orders. Brezeda saw me, and her face lit up with that fake, condescending smile, the smile of someone who believes they've already won the game. Little sister. What a surprise. You're just in time for the welcome party. Welcome to what, exactly, Brezeda? I asked, my voice flat, emotionless, a frozen lake. Damian walked over and draped an arm over Brezeda's shoulders, a gesture of possession over her and, by extension, over my property. To our new home, sis-in-law. We decided the city isn't for us anymore. The countryside is life, fresh air, something you, with all your work, can't appreciate. My mother, Silvana, came out of the house at that moment, wiping her hands on an apron I recognized with a pang of icy anger. It was mine. My dear, so good you're here. Help us decide where to put the TV room. Your sister says in the study, but I think it will get too much sun. I looked at the three of them, a united front of delusion, greed, and a lack of respect so profound it was almost admirable. I think there's a monumental confusion here, I said, my voice still calm, controlled. The permission was for the wedding. The wedding ended last Sunday. Brezeda's smile faded, replaced by a grimace of impatience. Oh, Amankai, don't start with your drama and your technicalities. We already talked it over with Mom. This is for the best, for everyone. You live in your world in Guadalajara. You're hardly ever here. The ranch is going to waste, gathering dust. We can take care of it, make it productive, bring it to life. She added, with the practiced finishing blow, besides, consider it your wedding gift. A generous sister from a good family would give this and more to her only sister. I felt a laugh rise in my throat, a bitter, dry laugh I couldn't suppress. Generous? A gift? They had mistaken my patience for stupidity. They had miscalculated spectacularly. There's nothing to take care of, Brezeda, I replied, looking her directly in the eye, letting her see the strange, cold calm that had settled in me. Because no one is staying. This is my house. It's the family ranch, she hissed, her face contorting with rage as she saw I wasn't following her script. No, I retorted, and my voice finally rose, not in a shout, but in a sharp, final declaration, like the edge of a razor. It is private property. And I am the owner. Just then, as if perfectly timed by a film director, a sleek black car appeared down the road and stopped silently behind mine. The driver's door opened, and out stepped attorney Hernan Montero. The arrival of attorney Montero changed the atmosphere instantly. The dusty heat of the countryside seemed to drop several degrees. He was not a relative they could argue with, shout at, or emotionally manipulate. He was an external force, a representative of a world of rules, contracts, and consequences that they, in their arrogance, had chosen to ignore. In his perfectly tailored charcoal gray suit, silk tie, and leather briefcase, he looked out of place and yet, at the same time, like the person with the most authority for 100 kilometers around. At his signal, two tall, discreetly dressed men in dark suits got out of the back of the car and positioned themselves on either side of the entrance, arms crossed, observing the scene in professional silence. "And who is this? Your accountant boyfriend?" Damian spat, trying to project an authority that was clearly slipping through his fingers. Montero walked towards us with measured steps, unhurried, and stopped beside me. He first addressed me with a slight nod. "Ms. Amankai, good morning." Then he turned his attention to the hostile triumvirate. His gaze passed over Damian and Brezeda with the indifference one might give a piece of furniture, and it rested on my mother for an instant before he spoke with a courtesy so icy it was almost an insult. "Good morning. I am attorney Hernan Montero, legal representative and member of the board of directors for the owner of this property." Brezeda let out a disbelieving laugh, a sharp, unpleasant sound. "Legal representative? Are you going to sue me now, Amankai? You're going to sue your own sister? How ridiculous. It will not be necessary to resort to a lawsuit if you cooperate in a civilized manner," Montero replied calmly, placing his briefcase on the hood of my car and opening it with a satisfying click. He extracted a leather folder and from it, a document. "Mrs. Brezeda, Mr. Damian, this is a judicial eviction order. It requests that you and any other unauthorized occupants vacate the property immediately and peacefully." Damian snatched the paper from his hand. His eyes scanned it quickly, his expression shifting from disbelief to a purplish fury. "This is ridiculous. It's a fake paper. I'm calling the police. You can't kick us out of our family's house." "I'm afraid that is where your fundamental error lies," Montero continued, unperturbed, as if explaining a simple point to a slow child. He opened another section of his folder. "This property, legally registered as El Milagro, is not and has not been, since its last purchase transaction, the property of the family. In fact, to be precise, it is not even the property of Ms. Amankai in her personal capacity." He paused dramatically, letting his words hang in the tense air. My mother and sister exchanged a look of complete confusion. I could see the gears in Damian's mind spinning furiously, trying to find a loophole, a legal gray area, an advantage. "The sole and legal owner of this property," Montero announced, his voice resonating with the weight of an irrefutable, corporate truth, "is the limited liability company, Tequila, the Fortress." The silence that followed was absolute, so thick you could cut it with a knife. The movers stopped in their tracks, statues in mid-motion. The wind seemed to hold its breath. Brezeda looked at me, her mouth slightly agape, forming the soundless question. "Tequila. What?" "Tequila, the Fortress," Montero repeated, pulling out another voluminous document, "a company of which Ms. Amankai is the majority shareholder, founder, and CEO. I have here a certified copy of the company's articles of incorporation, should you wish to verify it." He held the document out to Damian, who looked at it as if it were written in an alien language. I could see the exact moment that reality, in all its brutality, hit him. The color drained from his face. The man who thought he was a shark in a pond of small fish had just discovered he was swimming in the ocean, and that I was the damn apex predator. Any attempt at illegal appropriation, damage, or alteration of a corporate asset, Montero concluded, his tone now devoid of any trace of courtesy, sharp and direct, will not be treated as a simple and regrettable family dispute. It will be treated as a corporate crime. And believe me, the company will use all of its legal resources to protect its assets. And the resources of the fortress are considerable. My mother was the first to find her voice, a trembling, fragile whisper. Amankai. What is this man talking about? What is that company? I looked at her, and for the first time in 34 years, I felt that I saw her, and she saw me, without filters, without pre-established roles. And I felt no guilt, no need to justify myself. It's my business, Mom. The little business I started in my apartment 10 years ago. The little business that has silently paid your debts and financed every single one of my sister's failures. The little business that bought this ranch 2 years ago to save it from being sold to a developer for a pittance. The final revelation, spoken aloud, was not a bomb, it was a nuclear detonation. My mother staggered, leaning against a porch pillar as if her legs wouldn't hold her. Brezeda's mask finally shattered, revealing not just rage, but pure, absolute panic. The world as she knew it, the world where she was the sun and I was the shadow, had just imploded before her eyes, leaving her naked and blinded by a light she never knew I possessed. The impact of Attorney Montero's words, followed by my confession, was total. Brezeda's carefully constructed universe, an ecosystem where she was the center of gravity and I was a simple satellite providing funds and favors, shattered in an instant. You're lying, she screamed, her voice high and strident, a shriek of pure denial. You're lying to kick us out. You made all this up. Mom, say something. Tell her she's crazy. But my mother, Silvana, was as pale as paper, her gaze fixed on the articles of incorporation that Damian held with trembling hands. It listed my name, my signature, the company's capital stock figure with too many zeros to be an invention. It listed the documented, cold, corporate, and undeniable truth. It listed the daughter she had never bothered to know. Damian, the strategist, the businessman, was the first to grasp the magnitude of the disaster. His survival instinct kicked in, and like a rat abandoning a sinking ship, he turned on the one who, moments ago, had been his accomplice. You didn't know anything about this? He spat at Brezeda, his voice laced with an icy venom. You told me your sister was just a lucky employee. You told me the house was family property and that you had total control over her and your mother. I thought. Brezeda stammered, her arrogance evaporating to reveal a terrified, exposed woman. She never said anything. She's always been so simple. Of course she never said anything. Damian roared, throwing the papers to the ground with a gesture of impotent fury. Because while you were playing princess in a fairy tale, she was building a goddamn empire. You made us look like a pair of idiots. This whole plan, our entire wedding, our future, was based on her being weak and manageable. It was grotesque and yet strangely satisfying to watch their alliance, built on greed and their underestimation of me, crumble in a whirlwind of insults and accusations. My mother finally reacted, but not to defend me, not to acknowledge the truth. Her instinct, as always, was to protect the weaker one. She rushed to Brezeda, who had started to sob loudly, a theatrical, self-pitying cry. There, my daughter, she whispered, hugging her. Calm down, we'll fix this. Then she looked at me over my sister's shoulder, her eyes filled with a desperate plea and, for the first time in her life, a palpable fear of me. Amankai, please. It's your sister. Look at her. Don't do this to her. I'm not doing anything to her, Mom, I replied, my voice as firm as a rock, without a hint of the doubt that had plagued my entire life. She did this to herself. You all did. You thought my silence was weakness. You thought my generosity was an infinite obligation. You were wrong. Attorney Montero cleared his throat, a discreet but authoritative sound that brought them all back to the harsh reality of the moment. Gentlemen, he said, addressing the movers, who had been unwilling spectators to the entire family and corporate drama, I suggest you start loading everything back onto the truck. By law, you cannot bring goods onto a property without the consent of the legal owner, and your services here have clearly concluded. What followed was a spectacle of silent, efficient humiliation. Under the impassive gaze of Attorney Montero and the two security guards, who had become statues in dark suits, the moving crew, with an almost robotic efficiency, began to reverse the process. The huge gray sofa that had replaced mine was the first to go, maneuvered awkwardly through the front door like an unwanted animal being expelled. Every box, every piece of furniture, every appliance that had entered the ranch with the arrogance of conquest now left with the shame of retreat. I remained on the porch with my arms crossed, not saying a single word. My silence was my declaration of victory. It was the echo of all the years I had been quiet, of all the injustices I had swallowed in the name of a family harmony that was never real. But now, it was not a silence of submission, but of power. A silence that screamed, "The game is over." I watched Damian, who avoided my gaze at all costs, pacing back and forth like a caged animal, pulling out his phone and making frantic calls, probably trying to salvage what was left of his dignity or find a lawyer who would tell him what he already knew. He didn't stand a chance. I watched Brezada, sitting on the porch steps, her face buried in her hands, her body racked with sobs that no longer elicited any pity from me, only a cold emptiness. And I watched my mother, who went back and forth between Brezada and me, not knowing who to comfort or who to appeal to, a tragic figure trapped in the consequences of her own blindness, her chronic favoritism. The process took almost 2 hours of dense silence, broken only by the squeal of the truck's metal ramp, the sound of packing tape, and the muffled orders of the workers. When the last box was loaded, the moving foreman approached Damian with a tablet for his signature. Damian scribbled something on the screen with a furious gesture and handed the device back without looking at him. The truck closed its rear doors with a metallic and final clang that seemed to seal the end of an era. Damian went to Brezada and pulled her up roughly by the arm, without any gentleness. "Let's go," he said, his voice devoid of any tenderness or complicity. "There's nothing more to do here." They walked past me to get to their SUV. Neither of them looked at me. Brezada, with her makeup streaked and eyes swollen, looked like a stranger, a withered version of the queen she had always been. She had been dethroned, and without her crown of privilege, she was nothing more than a defeated and confused woman. They got into their vehicle and drove off, kicking up a cloud of dust that took a long time to settle. The moving truck followed, a clumsy giant disappearing over the horizon. The power had shifted, and the silence left behind was finally a silence of peace. My peace. Attorney Montero and his men left shortly after, following a brief, "We are at your service, Ms. Amonkai." I was left alone with my mother on a porch that felt strangely large and empty. The afternoon sun was beginning to set, tinging the sky with oranges and purples, colors of peace that contrasted violently with the storm that had just passed. Silvana stood there, wringing her hands, searching for words that could magically repair irreparable damage. "I didn't know, Amonkai," she finally whispered, her broken voice barely audible. "I swear I didn't know about your company, how big it was. If I had known." I let the sentence hang in the air before interrupting her. Not with anger, but with a genuine and painful curiosity. "What would have changed, Mom? What, exactly, would have been different if you had known?" She looked at me, confused. "Would you have respected my success more if you had known it was worth millions?" I continued, my voice calm but unwavering. "Would my no have carried more weight if it were backed by a board of directors and not just my feelings? Is my right to my own home only valid if I'm rich and powerful in your eyes?" She didn't answer, and her silence was the most honest and devastating response she had given me in years. The problem was never the money, Mom, or the ranch. The problem was respect. Or the lack of it, I continued, feeling each word free me a little more. "You never saw me as Brezada's equal. For you, there were always two roles, the one who needs and the one who provides. The one who is fragile and the one who is strong. I was always the strong one, the one who could endure, the one who had to sacrifice. You taught her she was entitled to everything she desired, and you taught me that it was my duty to give it to her." Tears began to run down her cheeks, tears of self-pity, not remorse. "I just wanted you both to be happy, to love each other as sisters. Love can't exist without respect, I said softly, more to myself than to her. And respect is built on boundaries, on clear lines. Today, I drew my line. I took a step towards the door of my house, my real house. I love this ranch because it's Grandpa's legacy, and he taught me the value of work. But from today on, it's also a symbol of my own legacy. It's the fortress I built to protect myself when no one else, not even my own mother, would. I looked at her one last time, the woman who gave me life but never understood my soul. I love you, Mom. But things are going to be different. Radically different. This is my house. You are welcome as my guest, when I invite you. But the rules, the decisions, and the boundaries, from now on, are set by me. And with AITA. I paused, taking a deep breath of the fresh country air. With AITA, I need time. A lot of time. Maybe all the time I have left. I walked into my house and closed the heavy wooden door. The sound of the deadbolt turning was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard in my life. For the first time, I didn't feel guilty about it. I felt free. 6 months passed. 6 months of a family silence that was both painful and profoundly healing. There were calls from my mother, at first frantic and full of reproaches, then pleading and tearful, and finally, tentative and cautious. I established my terms with a calmness I had never before possessed. We could talk, but any mention of forgiving and forgetting, of my obligations as a daughter or sister, or of poor AITA, would immediately end the conversation. I hung up the phone several times. Slowly, very slowly, as if she were learning a new language, she began to understand. About AITA and Damian, I learned through my uncle Hiladio, who had become my main confidant. Their marriage, built on the fragile foundation of greed and lies, did not survive the disaster. They separated 2 months after the eviction, amidst bitter recriminations. Damian blamed her for not having vetted her own sister better, and she blamed him for pushing her into a disastrous plan. AITA, without Damian's financial backing or mine, and with debts to pay, had to do something she hadn't done in over a decade, get a real job, at a department store. During that time, I dedicated myself to purifying El Milagro. It was a personal exorcism. I removed every wedding gift they had left, every withered flower, every trace of their presence. I hired a crew to repaint the walls they had altered, returning them to their original colors. And with the help of an old carpenter from the village, I lovingly restored my grandfather's painting, cleaning off the dust and repairing a small scratch it had gotten in the storage room. Hanging it back over the fireplace was a ceremonial act, the final and absolute reclamation of my space, my history, and my identity. The culmination of my rebirth came on a golden autumn afternoon. I hosted an event at the ranch, not a wedding, but the launch of my company's new jewel, Tequila, the Fortress, Grandfather's Legacy Edition. I invited my business partners, my distributors, my most loyal employees, my closest friends. The people who made up my true family, the one I had chosen and built, the one that celebrated my successes without envy and supported me without conditions. My uncle Hiladio stood by my side, a glass of my best tequila in his hand, his eyes shining with an almost paternal pride. My mother was there too. I had invited her. She stayed in the background, observing with a mixture of awe, melancholy, and perhaps a glimmer of understanding as her invisible daughter moved with confidence and authority, the center of her own universe. At sunset, I gave a short speech. I didn't talk about business or sales figures. I talked about my grandfather, about the land, about hard work, and about the importance of building something of your own, something that no one can take away from you. As I spoke, my gaze fell upon the agave fields, bathed in the golden light of dusk. They were no longer just plants, they were an army of silver spears, my fortress-made landscape. I understood in that instant that I hadn't just recovered a property, I had reclaimed my history, my worth, and my voice. And that was an inheritance that no one could ever try to take from me again. After everything that happened, after drawing that definitive line in the dirt of my ranch, I cut off all communication with my sister. I don't respond to her sporadic messages that oscillate between insult and self-pity, and I've made it clear I don't want to see her. My mother, though she now respects my boundaries more, sometimes, in moments of weakness, tells me quietly that I was too cruel, that blood is blood, and that a good person should find it in her heart to forgive. She tells me that I'm alone, but I know that being alone is not the same as being lonely. So, after telling you my whole story, every wound and every victory, I ask you, the people who have listened from the outside, without the weight of family history, with the clarity of distance, was I the bad guy?